when the pandemic really started, like in February and March of 2020, there are papers that come out that like talk from the attitude of like professional virologists why this thing is unlikely to come from a lab, unlikely to come from this Wuhan Institute of Virology. It's unlikely to have a non-natural origin. It's much more likely to come from someplace, in one of the markets. And it's very easily laid out. There's a lot of like kind of good evidence for it. Bret and Heather increasingly get really resistant to this. And they start to talk about, well, you're not allowed to have this discussion. You're not allowed to have this discussion in public because somebody is, there's this idea suppression complex that's coming along and keeping you down. And like, we're not allowed to have this conversation. And as scientists, we should be allowed to have this. And so,
while literally having the conversation.
Well, literally having the conversation to, 100,000 people on their, YouTube show. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And as a marker of just how,
and going on BIll Maher.
Well, that's what I was going to say. As a marker for just how oppressed these ideas were, they were invited on Bill Maher's show, Real Time with Bill Maher, to discuss the idea. And so we're going to, as with every great I Don't Speak German episode, you start with the easy stuff.
Yeah.
And today we're going to start with Bill Maher and the lab leak hypothesis. So this is our first clip. It's about 1.5 minutes long, and this is I linked this like kind of 10-minute clip in the show notes, so you can watch the whole thing. It is very like once you start like kind of watching these people enough, they just repeat the same talking points over and over and over again. So, but it is very similar to kind of watching them on the Dark Horse podcast, at least around this time. So let's just play this clip for now, and you can give me your impressions.
We've heard a lot recently about the fact that maybe the virus did start in a lab. Let's talk about that. The fact that there is this lab, I think it's the only one in the world quite like it, in Wuhan, where it started. It would almost be a conspiracy theory to think it didn't start in a lab.
You would think.
Right? And that theory was demonized at first, that, it can't, come on, that's conspiracy thinking, that it would started in a lab. But it certainly is a 50-50, would you say that?
It's far more likely than that. As a matter of fact, I said, I think in June, that the chances that it came from the lab looked to me to be about 90%.
Okay.
So this was never a conspiracy theory. In fact, that term is simply used to make it go away. It's an obvious hypothesis that is in need of testing, and we are only now, a year in, getting to the point where we can discuss it out loud without being stigmatized.
Okay. A big part of the problem, of course, is that we are so politicized, we are so polarized and partisan now as a country that if the wrong guy proposed this to begin with, and for half the country it was the wrong guy, then the rest of the country says, no way, no how, we're going to call that a conspiracy theory, and we're never going to revisit it. And the fact is that's not how science works. That is not science. You need to say, I've got a pattern, I'm going to make some observations, and I'm going to consider every possible explanation on the table. And did it leak from a lab? That was clearly from the beginning a possibility.
Okay.
So first of all, the wrong guy, obviously.
Yeah.
For half the country, he was definitely the wrong guy to suggest that. And again, I just want to, because right-wingers love to, pretend, just rewrite history so often. This was around the time that Trump was kind of going around, who, just to be clear here, at the time he was president of the United States. I know that we just get to forget that now, but he was the most powerful person on the planet at the time, with control of the most powerful military apparatus on the planet, going around and calling SARS-CoV-2 China virus. And literally like scratching out, the name of coronavirus on his speeches and writing in China virus to make sure that he was pointing out that this came from China. And there are very real geopolitical consequences to that sort of thing. And so, it turns out. Yeah.
As well as provable spikes in anti-Asian hate crime as well.
Absolutely, which we are still dealing with to this day, of course. There was this really overt effort on the part of the right and the far right to blame this on China and to blame this on, like Ben Shapiro was going on his show and going like, well, it doesn't come from here because we don't eat fucking bats, or worse to that effect, right?
Yeah.
So there is a real, I understand that if you want to speak slowly and quietly and talk about the nature of science and, we just need to observe every hypothesis and, prove or disprove it, based on like standards of evidence. That's not what's going on in terms of people being resistant to blaming, a country of 1.2 billion people for, for a virus leak. Again, it is this very subtle form of just kind of rewriting the entire background of this thing, and to pretend that this was always just about like this kind of rarefied thing of ideas. We're just going to sit around and we're just having a really dispassionate conversation about where the evidence leads, right? That's all we're trying to do here. And we're certainly not pushing our own reactionary agenda onto this, or like using this as a way of, banding our own credentials, well, that's certainly not what's happening. We just want a quiet conversation about the nature of the evidence. So I agree, Heather. Let's talk about the evidence, shall we?
They do some hilarious stuff about this on the Decoding the Gurus episode.
Absolutely.
They play this clip where they're talking later, and Heather is outraged that anybody might think that Bret said he was certain that COVID was a result of a lab leak just because he told Bill Maher that he was 90% sure that that's what happened. I mean, can you imagine anything so outrageous as to impute certainty to him on the basis of him saying he's 90% sure?
He's 90% sure. 90% sure. Like, Bret has no qualifications to like even make that determination.
Number completely just pulled out of his ass. Yeah, of course.
Right. And I mean, just to be clear here, like if you told me that the virus had come from Texas, right?
Yeah.
That there was that it came from somewhere out in West Texas somewhere, and that there's this West Texas Institute of Virology, and that maybe government regulations and the like the Texas standards for like biosafety had in some way been lax, I would go, yeah, that sounds very true. That sounds very likely to me. But in the same way that yes, the Chinese government was incredibly has not been very forthcoming in terms of providing information to other governments. Which other government would have been happy to like engage in that same kind of behavior had it come from Texas? The U.S. government would absolutely not have provided information to China or anywhere else about the smoking virus if it had come from Texas. This is just again basic political reality of the world that we live in. This is not complicated.
Why suppress it? Right? I mean, it wasn't being suppressed. The discussion was not being suppressed. There were people here and there, no doubt, who responded to the reasonable version where somebody said, well, maybe it was being studied in the research center in Wuhan, and it got out somehow. That's the reasonable version. Nobody discounts that. That's always been given headroom as a possibility. Most scientists don't think that's what happened because most scientists understand that that's these things almost always have a natural origin. So they tend to err on the side of what's the most likely explanation based on what normally happens. But the idea that it might be a lab leak or something, as distinct from like a deadly evil killer communist bioweapon or something, just something that got out, that's always been something that people have said, yeah, it's possible. And, we need to look into it, etc. And it's never been suppressed. There might have been people that responded to even the most reasonable suggestion with, "Oh, you're a Trumpian conspiracy theorist," but that doesn't mean that the suggestion is off the table completely, or completely. But they're so desperate to paint themselves as the suppressed, censored victims.
A lot of the people who were suggesting this as a possibility and as a probability were Trumpian conspiracy theorists as well. This isn't, let's just be clear about that. But like this conversation was had, and like let me just kind of move us forward just slightly here.
Yeah.
There was a paper in Nature. It is an open access paper. I've got a link to it in the show notes. Part of the abstract here is like, here we review what can be deduced about the origin of SARS-CoV-2 from a comparative analysis of genomic data. We offer a perspective on the notable features of the SARS-CoV genome and discuss scenarios by which it could have arisen. Our analysis clearly show that SARS-CoV-2 is not a laboratory construct or a purposely manipulated virus.
No.
This is, the technical details of like how you study genomic data, et cetera, ends up being, fairly complicated. And like, I am not independently able to kind of verify this. Like, this is not the kind of work that I do. But, you know, the basic logic here is that, you know, the thing that they keep suggesting is that this was, you know, like there's this kind of conspiracy idea that some of the scientists involved at the Wuhan Institute of Virology were involved in something called gain of function research. And this gain of function research is where you take a microbe, or you take a virus, or you take something and you try to evolve it in a direction to kind of give it, enhanced capabilities. And that way you can study the virus, you can study those mechanisms, and you can be kind of better able to understand, you know, how to kind of confront this thing if it does happen in the real world, right? So, and this research is, you know, it is controversial because, you know, there are these kind of, you know, ideas of if this is not, you know, properly controlled, then you can, it's not this sort of like completely implausible thing, although it's this kind of like science fiction Andromeda strain kind of idea on some level, right? But this becomes like kind of the thing. This becomes this kind of this kind of, I want to say, I don't want to keep using the word conspiracy theory because I think that doesn't get at the thing. But like, yes, some of the researchers working at Wuhan at the Institute of Virology were involved in this research. This was always a possibility. One of the things that was said in this Anderson et al. Paper is there's no known virus that would be close enough to SARS-CoV-2 in order to, you know, kind of evolve it in that direction. Like the closest we've got is about 96% similarity, which sounds close, but like you really need like 99.9% similarity before you could reasonably kind of get it there. Also, the mechanism by which the binding receptors are used for, you know, kind of binding into, you know, kind of human cells is in this kind of novel way that you wouldn't expect. Like you wouldn't build a virus to do this because it works in this way that you wouldn't expect it to. And like the backbone of the virus is not one that you can just kind of buy off the shelf. I mean, you know, and these are, you know, again, technical things that people working within this field just kind of look at it and go, yeah, this doesn't look like something that we would make. It just doesn't. Like it looks natural to us. And the other thing that you kind of run into is this kind of the fact that there were two strains in the Wuhan market as early as, you know, like November of 2019. The fact that there are two strains is strongly indicative that this was of natural origin. So I have another paper here. I'm not going to read from it, but one of the authors on that Anderson paper that I referenced earlier is this guy, Robert Gary. Now, he appeared on the This Week in Virology, episode 762, about SARS-CoV-2 origins. And this whole episode, like, it is virologists, professional virologists, academic virologists, very, you know, plain speaking, very, you know, like technically going through the details of, you know, exactly why, you know, what the different arguments are for various origin ideas for how SARS-CoV-2 came to be. And if the conversation is being had, it's right there. You can, but these are professional virologists. These aren't, you know, biology professors, you know, disgraced biology professors, you know, like spreading heterodox ideas from like first principles about evolution or whatever. Like these are people who do this every day and they're going like, yeah, this looks pretty natural. Like this looks very, very natural. But you know, that's just how you know they're in the pocket of big China. That's how, that's how we know.
There you go. It must be. Yeah, that's there you go. The perils of a priori reasoning for you. And again, you know, the saying something is being suppressed while literally loads of people are studying it and talking about it. I think that's going to come back in this episode. Oh, yes. No, it turns out that what they mean is the New York Times is not trumpeting our heterodox opinion as if it is fact. And therefore, this is not being discussed anywhere. But as always, that self-aggrandizing conspiracy theory approach is dignified by their particular way of doing it is to do it in this very sort of calm and sober and reasonable quiet voiced science with this aesthetics of the conscientious scientist going on. Heather's voice goes very low and she says, "That's not science," and stuff like that. But skepticism of good science is not science. It's not skepticism and it's not science. And that's what you're engaged in, Heather. It doesn't seem plausible to you. So you're just writing off what almost all the experts are pretty certain of.
Right.
So,
well, I did want to play a very brief clip, and I just want you just to be able to listen to this in the words of a professional virologist, and actually a couple of professional virologists, about this. The man-made idea, or the this kind of the two lineages in the in Wuhan. So this will just kind of like demonstrate that this conversation is being had by people who actually know what they're talking about. And you can judge this for yourself. But
this is great. I might link to that Potholer 54 video again.
I did not clip from the Potholer 54 videos, but I did put both of his SARS-CoV-2 lab leak videos in the show notes.
Brilliant!
I was just about to recommend those because those are excellent as well. And they kind of work through kind of the basic logic of the major claims that have been made. Potholer 54 is this amazing, like this is the guy, like this is one of the people you should definitely be following about this stuff, who does this kind of like science journalism for a living and actually does know how to read these papers and goes through carefully line by line and like tries to understand the actual arguments that are being made and bases his journalism on the actual evidence as it rises. And exactly what Bret and Heather say no one is allowed to do is what he's doing, right?
Exactly. And consequently has like a minuscule fraction of the subscribers that they have and a minuscule fraction of the views that they have, no doubt. And doesn't, by the way, I don't believe he doesn't have a Patreon or anything. He says, if you want to give me money, give it to this charity or that charity. That's what the guy does.
He's recommending a charity of reforestation in the Amazon, I believe is what he's recommending right now. So
that would be called integrity, Bret and Heather. That's right. It's a thing.
Not that having a Patreon is itself a sign of ill intent or anything like that. But yes. So let's play this clip from this is not from Potholer 54. This is from the This Week in Virology 762. I have linked that episode in the show notes, and you should definitely go and check out their show notes because some of the scientific papers that I linked here were originally, I took it from there. So just definitely go check this out. This is absolutely worth your time. And in fact, that podcast in general is very much, I don't know how their listenership or viewership is going to change after COVID is done, but that's probably not for another like 5 years. So I'm sure it's fine. But they're on episode 762, so they've been at this for like 10 years at this point. So let's play this clip and then come out the other side.
Let's finally play this clip.
Explain again why having two lineages is compatible with or more likely to show a natural origin.
So, I mean, it's perfectly compatible. It's you can have a very simplistic explanation how those two lineages got into different markets. I mean, all it takes is, a few animals on a different truck. The supply chain goes from one market to the next. But if we're talking about a lab leak, the virus would have to come out of a bottle in the lab into a cell culture, infect a worker. Then that worker would have to, go out into the community and I guess make a beeline to one of the markets, and then maybe that wasn't enough. They went to the other market, and somehow during that period of time, the virus, acquired these extra mutations, just the right ones to, send off this other lineage. It's too many coincidences to actually be compatible with a lab leak theory.
I don't know. That sounds really convincing to me.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Again, that whole episode definitely worth your time if you really want to kind of like dig into this a little bit. And again, check out the papers, read through it. There's really the thing that you run into with this kind of thing is that like any responsible scientist speaking within their field of expertise is always going to say, well, that's definitely something we should look into, even on like completely absurd ideas, because that's just sort of like how scientists are trained to communicate, particularly with the kind of general public, is like, well, yes, of course we should study every option and see, what the evidence for it is. But like, also they make no bones about the idea that like, they say like, this is very unlikely to have not come from a natural origin, like, and,
Sure. Yeah, on this subject, there is also a good episode of the QAnon Anonymous podcast where they talk about the lab leak theory. They get a scientist in. It's not just them talking about it, and that's worth listening to as well.
Yeah, I think I missed that one. I think I accidentally skipped that one, but yeah, they always do a great job with that sort of thing. So yeah,